Welcome to Create the Market, conversations with founders who didn't go to market, they created it. I'm Jared Robin. I'm joined with my co-host, Peter Engleman. This show isn't about going to market. There's plenty of shows that do that pretty well. It's about creating new markets. How do you cut through the noise and build something people actually resonate with? So today's guest is Vihaar Nandigala.
Yeah.
I got that right. Founder of Orange Slice. Him along with Kishan are building AI agents that find your customers who already want to buy, not prospects who might be interested, but people who are actively displaying buying signals right now. And they're doing this in one of the most crowded, noisy markets in B2B, sales, prospecting, and enrichment. But what makes the story so fascinating is the category language they're using. They're not positioning themselves as better prospecting or smarter enrichment. Everyone else is doing that. They're creating the market around an autonomous sales copilot that finds prospects that already want to buy. And they're reframing the entire conversation from spray and pray outbound to signal-based targeting. So I'm so excited. I got into Orange Slice because a friend showed me it, and it's been just so easy to use. Welcome, Vihaar.
Oh yeah, thanks for having me on, Jared. Super excited to talk about all things go-to-market.
And creating markets. Like just hearing your founding story, you sold your first startup at 19, restaurant tech company. That's pretty wild. Some people are going to college, going to classes, you're selling startups. Walk me through what that taught you about finding the right customers versus just finding any customers.
Yeah, definitely. To give some context, one of the first companies I started was in college called Kitchen Connect. And what we basically did was we filled in chefs and ghost kitchens into actual restaurant and kitchen space. So think of like Airbnb for kitchen space is always the easiest way to think about it. And one of the biggest deals we did was putting Mr. Beast Burger, I don't know if you guys remember that, but putting that in a lot of Midwest restaurant chains in Michigan. I was born and grew up in Michigan. And so a lot of that sort of story was, I'd say, a lot of door knocking, hustling. I actually don't recommend other people start the business. It's a very hard business with low margins and takes a lot of time, but it was kind of me dipping my feet into the water of starting a company and, getting into sales and understanding like a lot of it is just sort of hard work and effort that needs to kind of be done regardless.
You went from that to like JP Morgan, Kishan was at Ramp. When did you realize that even like these fast growing Ramp or massive companies like JP Morgan struggle with finding customers who already want to buy?
Yeah. So for context there, internally at JP Morgan, I just saw the sort of sales cycle and how they orchestrate things is not super well thought out. There was a lot of optimization left on the table. And then Kishan, when he was at Ramp, he got to run some growth experiments and actually see one of the best growth teams in the world as Ramp is growing super, super quickly, seeing how they're approaching these problems of targeting people that actually just need Ramp instead of volume, just talking to everyone. And directly seeing and learning from exactly Ramp's growth playbook and the things they were doing of tracking every customer, learning everything about them before they reach out is kind of something we took and said, okay, let's just give this to other startups, give this to other companies. And that was kind of the birthplace of our company, kind of seeing the difference between how a massive company does sales and then one of the fastest growing startups ever and how they do sales.
But what's interesting is this like sub story you have where you and your co-founder met on like a Bollywood dance team in Michigan. That's not really like typical, right?
Yeah, it's super uncommon. So me and Kishan, actually, we both were university students at Michigan, and the first time we met was on a Bollywood dance team. He was actually my choreographer, so he dances way better than me. You guys shouldn't ask me to dance at all. And that's how we actually first met. And we got close to that dance team and realized both of us were entrepreneurs at the time. He actually had a company called For Me. It was like this dance formation app. Fit very good, founder market fit because he was a dancer. And then I was sort of creating apps on the App Store, and we sort of really bonded through UGC marketing and sort of being entrepreneurs. And we ended up becoming sort of college roommates in our last year of college. And then as soon as I sold my last company, he was like the first person I pulled in because I knew he was super entrepreneurial, saying, hey, let's start something together.
And what's super interesting as well, like, so you go from these other worlds into this GTM world. You both had felt this problem. There's solutions already trying to solve this, Clay being one of them. But I want to go back. Like, is it true you had, like, you're in YC now? and you're super young in your journey still, but was your interview really from a hotel lobby in Shanghai?
Yeah, so we weren't actually planning to do YC. We sort of applied last second, and we already had our graduation trip planned out of us going to China, Japan, Korea, and we went on with that graduation trip, and we get an email a couple days into the graduation trip saying, "Hey, YC would love to interview you guys. Here's a 10-minute slot. You can't reschedule. If you reschedule, like we're just not going to take you guys in." And at this point, we were in Shanghai. It's about, and we're flying around. I think we land in Shanghai. We have the interview in like a couple hours. We find a hotel with sort of good Wi-Fi, and we're like struggling to find an area that we can take the interview. And we ended up taking it in the hotel lobby of this random Shanghai hotel. And we had a bunch of sort of Wi-Fi issues because in China, they have like this great firewall. You can't use like Zoom or like American products. And so we were struggling to get on the call. We ended up taking it on cellular data. It was a whole fiasco, but we ended up getting the job done.
This was like 2 a.m., right? It was 2 a.m.?
Yeah, it was at 2 a.m. Shanghai time. It was probably like lunch in California. And so it's completely normal, but we were up all night figuring out how do we get this done.
Tell me about that YC pitch. Like they're looking for 100x upside, and at the surface, there's a lot of companies doing what you promise. Talk to me about how you positioned it or the vision that you painted for them that got them to want to invest.
Yeah, I would say specifically for YC, we actually didn't even have the vision we have now going into it. I think at the start we were a classic go-to-market agency, and they saw kind of how scrappy we were and the traction we were sort of getting. And what helped in actually like pitching and raising our seed round, the vision was sort of being this sort of marketplace manager of having all the deals in the world, you know, in the absolute limit case, flowing through Orange Slice. If we get to connect buyers and sellers at a way more optimized level than people right now, we can drive so much value for the economy. So it's sort of, I always think sales is actually the biggest space for anyone to tackle because every company has a sales team and every company just prioritizes sales. And so I think the ambition of just doing it better than what everyone is currently doing and optimizing it, of having AI match buyers and sellers, is kind of what made people get behind this idea of, oh, this could be a really, really big company.
Well, I'm curious. Walk me through that vision, because this is different from Clay's vision even. And Clay is like the hottest company in go-to-market. What are you doing differently?
Yeah, the biggest thing, we actually used to use Clay as well when we were a go-to-market agency, but the biggest hurdle for us was, even in my last company, Kitchen Connect, it took a while for me to learn how to use Clay. And that was sort of the biggest friction point of why I don't think that it can't be adopted by everyone. And if you want to capture the market of sales, every salesperson, every company needs to be using the product. And I also think it needs to be fundamentally very easy to use and very easy to derive lots of value from. So that was a big fork in the road for us, where we decided, okay, Clay's a great company, but this is the direction they're taking of, you know, making a really powerful tool, but making it hard to use. And we said, if we want to capture the whole market and make, you know, $1 trillion company, everyone needs to use it. And the best way to do that is through having people just talk to the product like a friend or like a coworker and having it do all the actions. And so that was the main difference we decided to take against Clay, of that things don't actually need to be hard to use. They can be super easy to use and still generate the same amount of value.
Yeah, Clay invented the go-to-market engineer to overcome a platform that's difficult to use. And you're coming in basically saying, we're going to kill the go-to-market engineer. You don't need that. This should be easier and accessible to everybody. Is that right?
No, totally. We like to call all our users of our platform like operators, because truly it's kind of creativity that what drives the best go-to-market operators we've seen, at least, where you're not limited by, okay, how do I set this up? How do I connect these tools? How do I create this go-to-market workflow? It's truly thinking of, okay, what is the best go-to-market workflow, and just typing that in and seeing it sort of virtualize in real time.
From go-to-market engineer to go-to-market operator. I love that. How did you come up with that language, like that transition? Was that just came up from customer conversations? It was an epiphany? Because framing is so important in category creation. I would love to know how you landed there.
Yeah, it was actually talking with Jared too. I think Jared, we first met before we even announced our seed round pretty early on into the company. through a mutual friend, and we were struggling, I think, a while.
Everyone who's listening, that was probably a month ago.
That's true. The company's moved really fast. We're not even a year old for context. We're about 6 months old. So it feels like a long time for us. And actually finding the sort of persona we wanted to create, I think we went through a lot of bad ideas that Jared helped us out with. I think lead gen experts was in there as well. We were kind of figuring out what people wanted or how to frame this new position we were creating. And I think it actually came from our users. Our users sort of would just mention themselves as, yeah, I feel like an operator instead of an engineer, where I'm just orchestrating things. I'm not digging deep into the weeds and figuring stuff out.
Are you getting feedback loops from the market that this positioning is working, going against the Zoom Infos, the Clays of the world?
Definitely. A lot of our users are just happy with, I'd say, the actual approach we've taken of making go-to-market easier, but also making it super powerful. Of you can do anything in Orange Slice that you can do in any of those platforms. So you're not just trading ease of use for functionality, which I think is the common trade-off. And what we're trying to do is actually hit both of those things, which is very hard. And so a lot of people have started using our platform instead of Apollo Zoom Info because of the sort of AI nativeness of it, of having AI pull a bunch of data instead of being a static database. It tends to be a lot more fresh, and our users are loving that. So we constantly get feedback of this is exactly the sort of product people are looking for.
Yeah, that makes a ton of sense. Sticking with the use of language, we spoke about using operators instead of engineers. Everybody's talking about signal stacking, intent data, but you're coming in with an entirely different position. You're talking about autonomous sales agent, and you're creating this whole new category. Where did that come from?
Yeah, I'd say it came from seeing how go-to-market's moving. We spend a lot of time in the go-to-market communities like RevGenius and seeing a lot of people, how they're switching to tools like Claude Code, people are using Make and a lot more, and sort of creating these autonomous systems. And we realized, this is definitely the future of how go-to-market's working, of setting up these beautiful workflows and letting them run. And so we wanted to capitalize on that and then draw a lot of those people that are stitching together different tools to do that and say, this Orange Slice is a place where you can do that. We're kind of moving past intent data and just signal-based data, and we're thinking about, okay, how can we just create workflows on the current set of assets we have, like our websites, like newsletters, etc.
So Orange Slice in its current iteration, when was that GA? Like when did you go live?
Yeah, we went live actually about a month ago. We launched our first MVP to the public. For a very long time, we were just a go-to-market agency and just used our tool internally. And so we were just dog-fooding our own product, where we were just using it every day and hammering out a lot of the bugs and the inconsistencies we saw on the platform. And so we launched about a month ago to the public and having beta users and testing users. And now we've partnered with a couple GTM agencies to kind of keep the feedback loop tight and keep refining the product.
Is that your core market, GTM agencies, or are you also working with direct brands and businesses?
Yeah, I'd say there's really 3 users of our product that do really well. The first one is go-to-market agencies. They tend to be the most creative because they've seen so many go-to-market plays. So we love learning from them because they push the tool the most, and they love breaking the tool, which we love fixing. So they're always great partners. The second is the actual go-to-market orchestrator at companies, whether it be a RevOps person or etc. And they're really great at using the tool. And then lastly, sometimes it's a lot of these startup founders that, because the tool is so easy, they're able to just hop in and sort of be a go-to-market person themselves and create things. So those 3 personas of go-to-market agencies, head of RevOps, and some even startup founders love the tool so far.
So I read a stat, 50K MRR in 1.5 months. Is that true?
Yeah, that's sort of our growth during the YC batch and how much value we're able to provide to other customers.
That's insane. That's not just product market fit. That's explosive resonance. So what's the customer feedback that told you you'd move from useful tool to holy shit, this changes how we do sales?
I'd say the biggest thing is making the product easier to use, and that's what kind of led to explosive growth. And what we realized, especially with the explosive growth, is that the riches were sort of in the niches, where a lot of the sort of workflows we were building and implementing were super, super custom. And we realized there's no sort of one size fits all solution in sales. And that's really when our product clicked and started seeing explosive growth. Of now our product was used for super, super unique use cases that were driving 80, 90% of the value for these sales teams instead of the generic, oh, let me search for someone with a certain signal, etc.
Yeah. So you went from being an agency using Clay to building a replacement and getting that like quick growth. And you got Paul Graham as your first angel investor. That he doesn't really invest directly in a ton of companies, right?
Yeah, he doesn't generally invest in YC companies anymore, but we were having some explosive growth, and he actually invited us to his house for office hours. This is before we were even raising or we were even thinking about it. And so it was a very cryptic email from like things like pg@ycombinator.com. And we were like, is this even real? What is this? But we ended up responding to him saying, hey, yeah, we'd love to come over to your house. And we showed up at his house and we sat down at his couch and just talked about the company for about an hour of where we were thinking about going to it and what are some of the problems we might face. And we sort of learned a lot from him, and specifically the sales space and the major players and kind of what went wrong for them. And at the end of the conversation, he ended up really liking us and really liking our vision of being this middle marketplace for all deals to happen in the economy. And he's like, I would love to write a check if you guys are raising. And at that point, you can never really say no to PG. He's such a iconic figure, I think. So the rest was history.
I have to know, what was his take or advice on the sales technology space? Any nuggets of information there?
Yeah. So it's always generally been a very, very big space. And the actual leaders in that space aren't actually Apollo, Zoom Info. They're actually, I would say, Meta ads, Google ads, of like connecting buyers and sellers really, really well. And those are like the biggest companies in that space. And so when you think of it through that lens of Google makes actually all of its money through Google ads, not through being a search engine. They're selling that intent data of like, oh, this is what people want. And so finding that same sort of data, but just by scraping everything on the internet, is also a way to become a really, really big company. And Google, Meta are some of the biggest companies in the world. So if you really crack this problem and solve it right, of connecting buyers and sellers, there's no doubt in my mind you'll be $1 trillion company. And that was a really big insight for us, because not only were we just thinking about this Apollo and Zoom Info, but we were also we never even thought about, oh yeah, you're right. Instagram does sort of connect buyers and sellers really well, and same with Google. So that was a really good key framing that he introduced to us of kind of being more ambitious.
What I love about this framing, connecting buyers and sellers, like where my head first went was, oh, buyers are going to be using your platform too, and not necessarily. It's more you're doing exactly what the ads are doing. You're putting it in the right place. So like if you don't have to pay for the ads, which have, a baked in cost structure or whatever, and you could like kind of arbitrage in a certain way there to get way more out of, the cost of the product that you're using, so to speak. That's insanely valuable.
Yeah, definitely. I think that was a key shift in our thinking of actually like trying to compete with the ads. We're kind of competing with any company that is a way for our customers to get customers. So we don't just limit ourselves to all sales tooling. We kind of see any avenue to get customers as a sort of competition metric of we want to be better than that way to get customers.
Do you see yourself, because Clay, I don't know famously, but recently, rolled out their ad product, right? Like optimizing for ads, because the truth of the matter is to get to a buyer and not have an ad network, you're probably using a handful, not a dozen different ways to do it. You're using email, you're using a social media platform, messaging on the social media platform. Maybe you're going in person, maybe you're sending them something in the mail. Some of that you could optimize better than others, right? Like in your platform. But are you seeing even because I do think Facebook or Meta in general, Google, etc., there's still a major place that people consume the information, right? Like where attention is. Do you see yourself building like that out even better than what Clay has as a result? Because like ultimately, it's not exactly taking the L, but like you have to leverage another network probably, right?
Yeah, no, definitely. And I think it's always great to have these grand, big sort of visions and be super ambitious. But it's also good to be rooted in reality for a second as well, where yes, these are the platforms that a lot of people are spending their time on. So let's just try help optimizing those platforms as a way to be useful. And we actually had our first user optimize their LinkedIn ads through Orange Slice. So it's something that's completely possible now, and it's kind of showing the creativity of how much leverage there is in current go-to-market channels, that there's still optimization to be done. You'd think these big companies like LinkedIn or Meta would have these optimizations built in, but there's still so much room to grow and go to market for so many teams.
So you've now built multiple products from like For Me, Restaurant Tech, Orange Slice, and are learning what works like in real time. If you're teaching a workshop called, let's say, connecting buyers and sellers, like marketplace or in the world, or how to find customers who already want to buy your products, feels like a little cliche compared to what you're doing. What would be like 2 to 3 or 4 non-negotiable steps to creating that market?
Yeah,
what's step one?
I think that the step one is people talk about this like product market sort of fit. I also think there's this sales market sort of fit of you need to know how to position your product. You need to know how to talk about your product and the messaging of your product. So step one for me is always just spin up a bunch of copies of whatever service or product you're sort of selling, of how you pitch it, and then pitching it to 10, 100 people and synthesizing that feedback, and first find your sort of messaging that strikes and resonates with your end consumer. And that's kind of always what I've seen with step one. Even in my other company of Kitchen Connect, I think I probably got the door slammed on me metaphorically and literally 10, 20 times before I realized, okay, wait, I need to be pitching this service in a different way. And so that's what I always say of step one, of after you have your service or product to sell, kind of understand how to actually pitch it, talk about the pains, don't talk about how it works, etc. There's a bunch of optimization to do there.
Then following that, what comes next?
Yeah, and I think the next part for most teams is trying to do things that aren't orthodox. When you're sort of super small, you have this advantage of doing things that don't scale and sort of doing things that big companies can't afford to do. So at Kitchen Connect, I used to go to a bunch of these restaurant conferences and talk to these conferences one-on-one and onboard them onto the platform. And I used to do a lot of in-person going up to the restaurants right after their day closed and pitching them the idea in person. So doing a lot of these grindy, hustling things that can't be automated, I would say is actually your best leverage point of going from 0 to 1 for a lot of people starting their companies. And through that process, you find sort of great messaging. And then once you have those things of a first set generic pool of customers and great messaging, that's when you can think about scaling, building a lot of these go-to-market workflows. Interestingly enough, actually, Orange Slice, the sort of best users have been these sort of startups that have been around and then actually figured out a little bit of a sales motion and then start to automate it. I think too many times people just jump straight into automation without figuring out exactly how their service works or what's the best way to sell it. And that's kind of the most common mistake I see from even YC founders do it a lot as well. They just jump straight into automation without first understanding the pain.
And then after finding the things that don't scale, do you jump to automation, or like what's your next step in like building this market out?
Yeah, I think automation is the clear next step. After you get, you find what messaging works, you have a good set of customers that give you referrals to sort of hyperscale, and that's what we saw at Ramp. There's a lot of automation. Where Ramp sort of popularized, automated outbound, there's a lot of other automations you can do of automating inbound filtering and a lot of other things. So that's, the clear next step of after you get a core set of customers and you're doing pretty well is scale it to the moon, is always what I like to say.
And now you're probably at the point where you're doing the following step. Just about like what are you testing?
Yeah, at Orange Slice, I'd say we're in the automation step. And so the things we do at Orange Slice, we use a lot of Orange Slice to do. So what we like to do is we're really sort of community content driven. And so we automate the outreach to find potential partners of people in the go-to-market space. We also automate our inbound flow of having people, when they come onto our site, booking a demo, understanding, okay, are they in ICP where they exactly are? What sort of resources do they need? Do they need a loom of the product, a demo? Do they need to hop on call to build a custom workflow? And we have all those systems automated. And those are some of the 2 key ways we like to approach it.
Vihar, you and your founding team are incredibly visible online, very active on social. How intentional is founder-led content in what you're building today?
I think it's super intentional and super important. It's something that I wish I knew earlier. Going through YC in the batch, I was actually pretty silent online in socials. And we actually got most of our sales through just cold outbound. And what I'm sort of realizing is sales is a bit more interconnected, right? Where inbound flows into outbound and outbound flows into inbound, and you don't really know. They're not actually two separate things. And so I think always founder-led content, providing value, giving people updates about what you're doing just helps build trust, authenticity, and then also a paper trail of you're not just a ghost in the sort of matrix and another email in someone's inbox. You kind of have this whole persona behind you. So it's something I wish I knew earlier, and something we're definitely taking a big bet on in the future as well.
Does YC push you to do that? Are they pushing the founder-led content distribution?
They, I'd say, are not too swayed in terms of actual sales advice. They actually do a mini sales conference every batch, and I actually had the chance to speak at the last one because we did really well in terms of sales. And so that's something I always try to push entrepreneurs to, but every company has their own sales style. You see some companies that are strictly B2B, they don't do content, but somehow they're crushing it. And so you kind of have to find out what works for your product line. And generally, I like to say self-service products like Orange Slice, where you have a free to use product, you should try to be pushing content out there.
Makes a ton of sense. Do you all have content pillars that you're following, or is it just whatever you think of that particular day, you press send?
Yeah, I think when we started, it was definitely just pressing send on whatever we thought of that day. In terms of content pillars, we think about it through a couple of different lenses of what we've seen really do really well and what type of content resonates with our audience. I think there's also a sort of content and audience fit where some people optimize for virality, some people optimize for like quality of engagement. And so I think you actually have to decide which sort of bucket and what your type of content fits in. For us, we like to do a lot of founder-led content, informing people about our story. Hopefully it saves some people some hurdles along the way. And we also like to do product updates to show people we're constantly shipping and showing all the things people are doing. And lastly, we also like to post about cool things people are building in Orange Slice to kind of show people like, hey, you could do this too as well. And those are kind of the three content pillars we've realized strikes really well with our audience.
That's great. You mentioned that you have been kind of a mentor, or at least have been giving advice to other entrepreneurs about sales and go to market. What is the playbook? Like, what are you running through as the requirements to be successful in go-to-market?
Yeah, I think go-to-market, like I said before, is not a one-size-fits-all solution. You can't just look at a really big company and just copy what they're doing, hoping it works. What I've kind of seen is go-to-market's more artistic. It's like experimental, I like to say. I always like to say it's kind of like being an artist where you're throwing 1,000 things to the wall and then one thing sticks really well, and you're kind of squeezing all that juice out of that one sort of channel or thing that you found. And so with people, that's kind of the general framework I like to give of don't think of it as sort of an engineering workflow of if I just do these things, it'll sort of be guaranteed. I always try to push people to say, be more creative with your go-to-market, experiment a lot. And then once you see something working, scale it up and optimize that.
Well, I'm curious, like, what's the biggest difference between building a better clay and creating a market?
Yeah, so for us, I think building a better clay eventually turns into a new market. And that's kind of what we've seen with our early users. We have so many users that before were never interested in sort of go to market because clay had this high barrier to entry of this learning curve. So now we're expanding the market. We're getting a lot more people interested in using go-to-market tools that just before couldn't. And for us, that's creating a much bigger market than Clay is actually servicing. And that might be crazy to say because Clay's a massive company and they're crushing it right now. But that also gives us a lot of conviction in us. We have these people that were too scared or didn't want to actually learn how to use Clay starting to use our tool. Our market is now way bigger than Clay because we can encapsulate so many more people that just weren't going to use that tool in the first place.
If someone came to you tomorrow and said, I want to build sales prospecting, which is crowded as fuck, right? How would you help them? Like what's your framework for deciding whether they should try to create a new category or just build a better mousetrap?
Yeah, definitely creating a new category is so important. I think we early on, we didn't realize that as well. And we positioned ourselves of just, this better clay and only targeting people that were sort of using clay. And what we realized is it's much easier to not even compete with them, of just driving your own narrative and targeting those customers that are specifically fit to you. And for us, that's a lot of those non-technical, super smart, GTM-oriented minds. So when I'm talking to other founders in the sales prospecting space, my first piece of advice is don't start. It's insanely hard. But the second piece of advice is always being very understanding the space, going through the pains and hurdles. If you haven't sold before, I don't recommend starting a sales prospecting company. And then secondly, really tackling one specific problem you faced while you were selling and just honing and doing that thing right. And for us, it was sort of orchestrating, building a lot of these workflows super easily. That's always kind of the general advice I like to give to people in the sales space, because as it's a very hot space where companies are very attracted to it because it's a very sexy, glamorous space. Every company needs sales. And I see a lot of companies in every YC batch, there's one or two new sales tech companies. And usually they end up pivoting out either because the founders didn't actually have any experience selling, or they didn't pick a specific niche and drive and create an audience for themselves.
You know what? I would like to even rephrase what you said. Like, instead of building a bigger market, you're kind of doing what Airbnb did. Like people versus the hotel space, right? Like, people are going to stay somewhere, right? Like, people are going to prospect some way. So you're creating more people prospecting.
Exactly.
Sure, but they weren't staying in a hotel because hotels they were expensive. They had limited amounts, like they were booking out during conferences. You have to get them so far in advance, awful cancellation policies. But they needed to stay somewhere. So they were sleeping on somebody's couch. They were using their Gmail directly or something. They were making phone calls like normal. But what Airbnb did was it captured more of the people prospecting in this metaphor, right? Like, it didn't build a bigger hotel market, but it built a bigger people that were willing to pay to stay overnight somewhere market, right?
Exactly.
So it built a bigger on the activity, but not necessarily, because the hotel market is the hotel market, right? And it created something bigger as a result.
No, that's actually such a good way to frame it. I'll probably actually steal those exact words, Jared, from you. That framing of how Airbnb disrupted it. That's exactly what we're trying to do.
You're different because Clay's built a market of people that are really technical for their outbound. They didn't capture people doing outbound that weren't technical.
Mm-hmm.
Hotels didn't capture the people that didn't have $400 and 6 months lead time to book a hotel room. So,
Exactly.
But anyway, dude, this has been such a pleasure. How could people reach you and Orange Slice, find out more?
Yeah, we're completely live, self-service, free to try at orangeslice.ai. And if you ever want to reach out to me, my email is vihar@orangeslice.ai. I read every email. I know that people like to hide their email if they're afraid of spam. If you ever want to get in contact with me, always happy to sort of help users and even just talk GTM. One of my favorite topics to always chat about.
Vihaar, thank you so much for coming. Peter, for helping orchestrate this. This is one of the fastest growing companies that everybody's about to see. Thank you for coming, man.
No, of course. Thank you for having me, Jared. It's always a pleasure.